Welcome to Dead and Roasted. The stories you're about to hear are based on real experiences and terrifying encounters, submitted by listeners just like you. Some content may be disturbing or unsettling. Listener discretion is advised. So grab your favorite drink, maybe a chocolate cream cold brew, and settle in, because these are tales from the break room.
Story 1.
I don't think that was poultry from Christian H. The open road is something few people get to fully experience. It's freeing, knowing that if you follow the asphalt and yellow paint, you'll end up at another bastion of human existence. I'm not talking about driving from home to work. I mean driving for a living, spending more time at the wheel than at home. You're alone, where the only sound is the diesel engine roaring ahead, and if you're lucky, a radio station playing the same songs. I'm sure the guys driving now have better ways to keep their minds occupied, but we didn't have that in the 70s. You really got familiar with yourself in a way few people today can understand. You're not here to be lectured about the way I think things should be, though. It's not my place. I'm here because something happened on one of my drives I can't explain, at least not in any logical way. I worked as a trucker for years with different companies, moving all kinds of things. Animals, machinery, refined metals. At the time of this incident, I worked for one of the biggest chicken producers in the U.S. My job was strictly transport. I'd move live chickens from farm to plant or processed meat to dispensaries. It paid well, but kept me away from the family a lot more than I liked. The wife had wanted me to get a more local job for years, but the pay cut was hard to take. The day all this started, I had just come back from a 2-day drive delivering chicken byproducts to a disposal site. My wife had voiced her need for attention, so I was in a hurry to get home. I had just pulled up to the stop sign leaving work when I saw my boss. I'll call him Bill, and you can refer to me as Brad. He ran out the front doors to catch me. The temptation to sling rock his way was palpable. He had forced the last job on me, and I wanted to go home. But instead of causing a scene, I parked my truck as he made his way to my driver's side window. While he stood watching me roll it down, I knocked some ash from my cigarette onto his boots. He looked annoyed at that, but started. "Thank God I caught you, Brad. You better thank me for not driving off and leaving you dry. Who do you think you are, huh? It's been weeks since I saw my wife, and you come running out here trying to drag me back onto the road?" I said, shoving my finger in his face. "How do you know I was going to ask you to pick up a load? What if you had forgotten something?" he said with a nervous smile. I stared at him for a long minute, which wiped the smile off his face. "Look, Brad, Mitchie called again. I've tried everything, but he's not picking up. I've got a very important load my boss wants moved ASAP." I clicked my tongue before turning the ignition. "Wait, there's a big bonus on this one. $1,500. Straight out of the boss's pocket, too. Not taxed. All cash." Well, that would do wonders for us. I thought we had an okay life, but things could always be a bit better. I took my hand off the gear shift. "Dang it, Bill. Where to? And you better call Cindy. Tell her why I won't be home tonight," I said, thumping the butt on the gravel. His brow loosened and a smile crept across his lips. "It's at one of our old warehouses. We stopped stocking it years back. Now we just store old equipment there. It's a 2-day drive from here." "Oh, Jesus. Well, let's get it loaded. I'd like to get this done," I said. My rig was pretty tacky. I'm embarrassed to say it. Was jet black with flames rolling down the back. Thinking back, it was dang ugly. And it turned heads in the wrong way. You know, a lot of eye rolls and scoffs. Some of the loaders were getting the trailer ready. It was an enclosed trailer. We called it a dry van. They carried a large metal box on a forklift. It had small holes along the sides and the top. The holes were just big enough to fit your pinky through. Kind of like what you'd carry a new pet home in. "The heck you got me hauling? I've never carried something like that before," I said. "Can't tell you that. Don't worry, it's nothing illegal," he said. Whatever it was made Bill sweat, though. He stood a good 10 feet from that trailer. I'd moved chickens, but they were always in flimsy wire. Cages. This thing was made of thick metal, painted matte black. It was heavy, too. The forks creaked as it was lifted into the trailer. Some of the idle workers backed away. It was loaded onto the trailer with a substantial thud. When you get to the warehouse, there'll be a man waiting. All you gotta do is pull the trailer around back, unhook, and drive off. He'll do the rest, he said. You want me to leave the trailer? Yes, don't worry about it. I'll get someone to pick it up later, he said. But before I could get away, he grabbed me by the arm with unusual force and pulled me close. One last thing, Brad. Don't open that trailer. Whatever you think you hear in there, you don't open it. Got it? He said. I would have laughed at him, but something in his tone, the way he looked at me, stifled it in my throat. I realized Bill wasn't happy about this either. His mention of noises didn't fill me with confidence, either. The first night was rough. When I finally left for the warehouse, I'd been on the road all day and wasn't ready for another long drive. Staying at the office was an option, but this seemed important. So I drove for a few hours before quitting near a local stop. It was familiar to me, a little gas station just outside of home base. I checked to make sure my truck was secured, locked up, and went in to shower. It was nice to wash off the day before resting. The plan was to be on the road again by 5 a.m., so no time was wasted on the shower. While walking by the trailer, I noticed a strange clicking sound coming from inside. It was quiet, and at first it sounded like the truck. Listening through, it wasn't the normal odd sounds it makes after a long drive. It sounded like someone clicking their tongue, with a hefty bass too. I put my hand on the trailer. The sound reverberated off the metal walls. No one had gotten in. Every lock was still secure, and no other vehicle was around. It was weird, but I blew it off. There wasn't much time to care. Anyway, whatever the clicking was, it stopped sometime during the night. Before leaving, I debated calling Bill, but he told me the noises were nothing, so he wouldn't be giving me an answer. Still, I felt he should know. So I gave the pay phone a ring. He didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail. Hey Bill, whatever y'all got me moving is making weird sounds. If this thing is a bomb or something, I think it's a dud. Things stopped clicking last night and been real quiet since. I'll call you if something else happens. You better pick up next time. Brad. I hung the phone back up and hit the road. I drove another 6 hours through the mountainous foothills of the Appalachians. The highways don't run as smooth there. You'll go up and over large hills and drive along the mountain. For an inexperienced driver, it'd be intimidating. It was for my first few drives. At this point, though, I'd driven over them close to 100 times, so my nerves were under control. It was my 8th hour of the drive, and the road was small. 2 cars could barely pass by one another. Luckily, it had been empty until this point. A turn came up, and as I prepared for it, a black 60s Impala came flying around the corner on the wrong side of the road. With little time for a reaction, I slammed my brakes and laid on the horn, hoping to God the person would change lanes. Smoke billowed from the wheels as the smell of burnt rubber filled my cab. The ear-scraping sound of the tires was accompanied by a loud squelch of metal, which came from inside the trailer. The rig came to a stop just as the Impala switched lanes. It barely missed the rear end of my trailer as it blew past me down the road. Freaking, I said, hanging out my driver's window. I tried to scream more profanities, but the smoke from my brakes and tires forced a cough. The truck wasn't damaged, though it was close to coming off the edge. The concerning thing was the clicking sound. It was back, and with more rapidity than earlier. I got out to check the trailer. The thing rumbled with each click. A new, large dent now stuck out from the side. It had a point to it, like something large and sharp had slammed into the side. I'm going to beat the brakes off you, Bill. Next time I see you, I said under my breath. The veins in my head were pumping fast, and I was hot. I'd get this way sometimes, like a kettle on a red-hot stove spewing steam through the air, waiting for relief. I say this so you know I wasn't thinking straight when I yanked the keys from the ignition and grabbed my flashlight from under the seat. I made my way to the back, fumbling with the keys. I cursed Bill and the big boss for forcing this job on me. I found the right key and shoved it into the lock that held the latch and the two large doors. The lock opened with a satisfying snap. I opened the door, leaving the keys hanging from the lock. As they opened, the whole trailer fell silent, clicking, ceasing. The light from my flashlight revealed the large metal crate. It was toppled onto its side. The lock was still secured, but the top had been ripped open from the inside. Large speckled feathers lay around the box. I wouldn't say they were chicken, though, because they were the size of my forearm. The silence from inside the trailer calmed my blood, but the sight of the toppled crate is what snapped me out of my anger. I suddenly felt this was a terrible mistake, especially when I looked towards the darkened part of the trailer. 4 eyes stared back at me. The bottom 2 were green, like algae baked in a dried-up lake. The top 2 were a deep blue, like the last layer of ocean, before total darkness. As I stared back, the clicking began again. It was slower than before, and I felt it echo through my chest. Its pupils dilated as it lowered towards the ground. I was unable to move. The light onto the creature, whatever it was, deserved to stay in the dark. Its rhythmic noise increased in speed as it moved closer toward me. Death watched me. If I remained, I would die. I knew that. Its pupils shrunk, forming tiny black holes at the center of its eyes. It charged forward with heavy footsteps, rocking the ground with its apparent weight. With a pounding heart, I slammed the door and threw the lock over the latch. I went to snap it shut, but the thing hit the door, throwing me off the back, landed on my side hard, crushing my collarbone. It kept slamming into the door, causing dents to form. The latch rattled, threatening to open. I jumped up, and with a bit of pain, I snapped the lock shut. It rammed into the doors a few more times before finally stopping. The trailer rocked with its movement as the sound slowly subsided. Making my way to the driver's side door with shaking hands, I drove away. The whole ride was spent miles above the speed limit. It took another 6 hours before the next stop came into view. Wasted no time calling Bill. I phoned his personal phone this time. It was in the morning, but after calling twice, he finally picked up. "Bill? Owner speaking. Who?" he said, yawning. "Bill, what the heck do you have me moving? That thing nearly ripped my head off," I said. "Brad, wait. Please don't tell me you opened the back." "You're ding right I did. Some stupid kid came flying on the wrong side of the road and nearly killed us both. So I went to check the load, like we're supposed to. Bill, I saw that the crate was turned over and its lid had been ripped off." "Christ, Brad. You have to get to the warehouse now. I need to call the handler." "He's going to need backup," he said, losing all tiredness at once. "Handler? What are you talking about?" "Brad, be quiet. Do your job and get back home. What's important now is that you get to that warehouse. She's not going to stay passive for long," he said, with an unsatisfying click. I slammed the phone into its place, shooting pain up my shoulder. Sucks being the lowest man on the totem pole. You're never told anything. I hoped to get some rest, but that wasn't going to happen apparently. So I went inside the truck stop, grabbed some caffeine pills. With a few of them shoved into my mouth, a cigarette in my lips, and the radio cranked all the way up. I started the engine. That was one of the longest drives of my life. After I left the stop, I didn't take my foot off the pedal until I reached the warehouse. A few times I blew past a Smoky and I surely thought I'd get pulled over, but they didn't even flash their lights. It was strange, since it really could have cost me my job, but I guess Bill pulled some strings to make this happen. Quickly. The warehouse was completely dark when I pulled up. There were no other buildings nearby, large pines being its only neighbors. The gate was open, but I could tell all the windows and doors had locks. A few no trespassing signs on the fencing. A bunch of decommissioned trailers with company logos sat in the parking lot, along with 3 black sedans. When I pulled around back, there was a group of men waiting. All 4 of them wore thick Kevlar jackets and padding. 3 of them had large brown gun cases. When I pulled up, they began to unlatch them. I stepped out and began to unhook the trailer. When finished, one of the guys walked over to me. He was dressed, like the others, but his clothes under the armor signified he was in a different pay bracket. I was about to speak when he reached into his pocket and pulled out a large wad of cash. It was way more than 1,000, that's for sure. For your troubles. Thanks for getting it here quickly. Best not talk about this. Got it? He said. As much as I wanted answers, the cash was more tempting. Plus, I had a good idea what would happen if I said no. Got it, I said with a bit too much poison behind my words. I grabbed the money from him and hopped in the truck. Good man. Now go home to your wife and son, he said. With that threat, I left. As I was leaving, loud and rapid, gunfire came from the warehouse. The sounds flowed through the trees as I drove, until suddenly it all stopped, leaving only the sound of my engine to accompany me home. I quit my job that day, called Bill on a payphone and told him so. He seemed to understand. He even said he'd be a reference for me. It was $1,500 they gave me that night. Back then that was a good bit of money for a single 2-day job. I still don't know what that was or why I had to transport it. I've looked on other sites, but no one has claimed to have done anything similar. If the appearance of the thing sounds familiar to you, or the sounds it made, or any other part of my story, let me know so I can stay far, far away from the next one.
Story 2.
Phantom in Chains Isle from. That being said, I've seen some things I just can't explain, and this seems like the right place for them. As an aside, I've worked in a few different jobs, and while I'm not saying things follow me, I live very near to one of, if not the most haunted cities per ghost per capita. That does have a passive effect on your rationale. The first thing that springs to mind comes from days working retail. I spent far too long taking crap from the public before I got out of there. As anyone who's worked there can tell you, it's not a pleasant atmosphere. I worked a lot of early setup and late close shifts, sometimes back to back, and I can tell you that store was freaky at times. This involved a phantom member of staff. I'd worked in the store for about a couple of years before I saw them the first time, though I'd heard the stories before it happened to me. There was a plaque in our loading area for a staff member who had died on the premises, though the reason varied depending on who you asked. Usually it was a tragic loading accident, but a few people claimed it was suicide by a few differing methods. It was one of the first things new guys working stock to shop floor would ask about. This was usually what people put the events up to, but I never felt satisfied with that answer. The first time I saw them, I was working a late shift with one other person in the customer cafe area. This wasn't really allowed, as we served food until unreasonably late and had fryers and hot plates on the go all the time, so the potential for injury was increased the lower the number of staff, and with breaks included, you were often left on your own, having to serve, cook, and take out food, all while dealing with the gracious general public. I chased my colleague S away for their break, as S had been working for round hours without one. I prepared myself mentally for any issues likely to come up. The store was generally quiet, so I got to some cleaning out front to get ahead of the close, and so I'd be around if a customer showed up. The layout of the checkout area was a funky L shape with a weird angle instead of the usual right angle where the two straight edges meet, with the prep bent cooking area behind two doors about FT apart, one for entry and one for exit. Both doors had small windows in them, but that's the only viewpoint into the cooking area. Hence, lone or low working numbers were prohibited. If you hurt yourself, no one could really see, and it would be a long time before someone came to do a welfare check. Much more likely, a line of customers would build up over time, and a manager would be harassed into finding out what was going on. I was cleaning the front of the register area. You'd be surprised how messy customers are, and how few will tell you if they or their children have spilled on the front of the counter. I popped my head up just above the counter, bringing me eye level with the bottom of the door window. Through it, I saw a person looking at me, who turned to their left and walked out of my view. Thinking it was my colleague, I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I took off my apron as I spun through the door, pushing it open with my back. This was the door on my right, which would be the end door and the direction the person had walked in, and I began talking to my colleague. "Hey, S, you should have let me know you were back already. I'd have run a coffee up for us before I left." I stopped dead there, as I could see no one in the kitchen. The hair began to stand up on my neck, but there's enough counters to hide behind, so I thought maybe S was messing with me. I popped my head back out the inn door just to make sure they hadn't come out as I'd run in, but there was no one in sight. I walked back into the kitchen saying, "Hey man, don't mess with me. I need a break too, you know." I checked behind all the counters, but there was no one there. Turning a full circle just to take the room in, I could swear I saw a shadow on the far wall, well away from any shadow the ceiling lights could cast from me. And I swear that usually hot room dropped a few degrees. I froze on the spot, not moving, not knowing if it was a trick of the light, or I was seeing a person-sized and shaped shadow moving across the wall. It seemed to get thicker, more three-dimensional, more real, as it worked its way toward the fire escape on the far wall. Just as I was convinced I was losing my mind, S walked in halfway through some apology to a customer outside. "Hey Wolfie, there's a customer who says he saw you walk in here minutes ago." She then trailed off as she saw the look on my face, a confused and worried look. "Are you all right?" she asked. I don't think I answered her. I just took off my hat, picked up my fleece jacket, and left for my break. I just wanted to put some distance between me and whatever that was that happened to me. I did see this figure a few more times in my years at the store, but it never had the same chilling fear effect on any other occasion, and I still don't know what it was. But every time I shop in that store, I stay away from the cafe area, just in case it comes to say hello. Another incident that happened to me a few times occurred in the changing room area for staff. There were lockers and hangers for coats and outside clothing, and in between the hangers were chains for some reason. Oftentimes you'd be standing in the changing rooms on your own at the start or end of a shift, and the chains would begin to swing on their own. Slowly at first, then building up momentum until you could hear them clinking together. The gent area was a small open square room with the lockers on the walls, so there was no way it was another person. And before you cry air conditioner, I'm from the UK. We only have that in very few places, and retail staff areas are not one of those. Honestly, every time it happened to me, it felt like the temperature dropped, and I got the feeling that someone was playing with the chains, like they were stroking them rather than pushing or throwing them around. Believe me, when you finally notice that noise and find the chains swaying, you remove yourself very quickly from the room and just leave them to do their thing. The Forest Road from Wisdom Tooth. Wolfie, I'm not a convinced believer in the paranormal. Even with some of the things I've seen and experienced, I try to stay on the rational side of things, as I know people's imaginations can run away with them. It makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. If you're in a cave for shelter, you want to be wary that something big and scary could be in the shadows. But it's harder when you know that shadow on the wall is just the coat over the chair in front of the window and not some sleep demon waiting for you to drift off.
Story 3.
The job I had could be brutally exhausting from dawn to nightfall, navigating through rough terrain, setting markers, and measuring distances required for road construction. As a road surveyor, I always came home filthy, wet, and incredibly tired. Each project had its own unique set of challenges: rocky ground, swampy soil, or steep inclines. This made every job different and ultimately more difficult. During the work, I was always accompanied by my crew. My crew consisted of me and 5 other men. The most experienced among us was old Tom. Tom had more experience than most of us could ever hope to have, and he had a trick for every situation. He had a long white beard and a scar across his face, a reminder of the dangers he'd faced. One story Tom often told us was from years ago when he was in charge of removing trees from the future path of a road. While cutting down trees, one fell the wrong way, directly toward the crew. The tree killed 2 of the men and left Tom badly injured. "Maybe my face looks like a bird did its business on it, but at least I'm alive," he'd say, joking every time he told that tale. The rest of the crew consisted of Jonathan, Samuel, Lawrence, and Dean. Dean and Lawrence being the ones in charge. Dean, we like to call the joker of the group. He was always cracking jokes. Many of them were corny, but some were good. Jonathan, on the other hand, was a calm man who didn't talk much. He was an introvert, but a good person with a passion for collecting rare items. Lawrence was the big nerd who always had some fun fact to share each morning over coffee. Samuel was the grumpy one, complaining about everything. We all called him Mr. Grumpy. Despite this, we all got along really well. Working with those guys was always a blast. But things took a dark turn last year, around summertime. I was just weeks away from taking vacation. eager to recharge when one final job came up. We were tasked with charting a path for a road through an old, infamous forest located on the outskirts of a small town, which I'll refer to as Greenwell. The locals had a deep fear of this forest, and they would avoid it at all costs. The place was known to be haunted. People whispered about ghosts, witches, and most often werewolves. Locals claimed to have seen shadowy figures darting between the trees, or heard howls echoing through the night. The scariest part, however, was the reality. There were reports of people going missing in those woods, enough to make anyone question if there was something more sinister lurking there. Of course, my crew and I were skeptical. It was just superstition, right? But the job paid nearly double what most others would offer, as many companies refused to take it on. We started our work at dawn. Our goal was simple: survey the land and map out the road, marking trees and identifying major obstacles that would need to be cleared. The forest was dense, consisting mostly of old oaks and thick underbrush. The canopy blocked out much of the sunlight, making the atmosphere dark and chilly. The forest floor was muddy, but we were properly dressed and prepared for the rough conditions. The sounds of insects and various animals surrounded us, but everything seemed pretty ordinary. Still, the stories of the forest lingered in our minds, and it was hard not to feel a sense of unease. I frequently got that strange feeling of being watched. Dean would try to lighten the mood with jokes. "Come on, ladies," he'd yell, trying to keep our spirits high as we worked. But then things started to get strange. It began when I noticed something moving out of the corner of my eye, too quick to follow. I kept quiet about it, thinking it could be anything, but Jonathan soon spoke up. "Feels like we're being watched," he said, rubbing his neck. "Yeah, I saw something too," I admitted. "Probably just a deer," Samuel suggested, but we were on edge, and it didn't feel like just a deer. The next day we started cutting down trees. Old Tom was in charge of hauling them away, while the rest of us worked with chainsaws. After a few hours, we took a break and wandered among the trees to see how much progress we'd made. That's when Lawrence called us over. "Guys, come look at this!" he shouted. We all gathered around him to see what he'd found. There, on one of the trees, was a massive claw mark. And it wasn't just any mark. The surface was coated in a dark red liquid. It looked like blood. "Tom, what do you think?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "Could it be a bear or a wolf?" Tom studied it for a moment. "Son, I've seen plenty of wolf and bear claw marks, but this one is deeper, bigger. Maybe a bear could have made it, but..." He didn't finish, and I noticed his uncertainty. "What about the liquid?" I asked. "It's tree sap. Don't worry about it," Tom answered. But we all knew that it didn't look like sap. We pushed on, eager to finish the job as soon as possible. As the days went by, the sense of being watched grew stronger. We'd hear twigs crack under unseen feet, see shadows flit between the trees, and hear eerie howls in the distance. It was as if we were being hunted. Things escalated quickly. We began finding dead animals: rabbits, squirrels, wild boars, even deer. They were mutilated, their blood spilled everywhere. But the most unsettling thing was the claw marks we saw on them. They were identical to the ones on the tree, deep, tearing into flesh. At that point, even Dean started to take things seriously. He began insisting that we finish the job quickly. On the 8th day, we worked late into the evening. The sun had already set, and we were deep in the woods marking measurements for the road. That's when we heard a scream. It sounded like old Tom, and he was in pain. He was calling for help, but his voice kept shifting, like he was being dragged. We frantically searched, using flares and flashlights, but all we heard were his screams echoing through the woods. Then suddenly, everything went silent. "Tom!" Lawrence shouted. That's when we heard it. The worst sound I'd ever heard. The sound of bones cracking, not in the normal way you might hear from a fall, but a sickening, crunching sound, like a dog breaking bones. But there were no dogs in sight. We froze, fear gripping us. Then we called the police. The next day, the police arrived with dogs to help track Tom's scent. But the dogs were too scared to enter the woods. "They don't usually do this," one of the officers explained. Eventually they calmed the dogs down, and they entered the forest. It didn't take long for them to find what remained of old Tom. His clothes and body parts were scattered across the forest, torn apart in a way no bear could manage. We were in shock. Tom had been like a father to us. Now he was gone. Dean was furious.
swearing vengeance on whoever or whatever did this.
The local police insisted it was a bear attack, despite the clear evidence to the contrary. We tried to explain, but they wouldn't listen. In the end, we all agreed to stay and finish what we'd started. We weren't doing it for us, but for old Tom. As we drove back from the forest, I began talking to Jonathan. "So, about those werewolf stories, what do you think now?" I asked. Jonathan paused before replying. "I've always been open-minded. Maybe out there, somewhere, there's something strange," he said. I didn't know how to respond, but I couldn't help thinking about it. The next day, we made our final trip into the forest. The sun was setting as we finished our work, and that's when we heard it. A low, growling sound. Howling. Lawrence took charge. "We're done. We're leaving now. Stay close, move fast, and if you see anything, yell." He was carrying a rifle. We practically ran, our hearts pounding in our chests. All I could think about was old Tom, and I didn't want to be the next victim. Just as we reached the road in our vehicles, there came another growl from behind us. Then, the snap of a branch. I turned, and there it was, standing between the trees. At first I thought it was a person, but it was massive, muscular, and covered in fur. Its head was canine, and its arms were long with claws. I froze, as did the others, and then it charged. Samuel slapped me. "Come on, move!" he shouted, pulling me back into reality. We ran for the car, but the creature was faster. It grabbed my leg, and I fell. My heart raced as I thought, "This is it." But then I remembered the silver knife I had brought. I pulled it out in a panic and stabbed the creature. It let out a whimper and ran back into the forest. I passed out shortly afterward. When I woke up, I was in a hospital, my leg bandaged and throbbing with pain. The nurse said I was lucky to be alive. When I asked what happened, she told me it was a bear attack. "It wasn't a bear," I said. When she asked what I meant, I couldn't explain. How could I? You don't just tell people a werewolf tried to kill you. The job was finished by a different crew, but I heard rumors that they sometimes heard howling in the distance. That night changed how I viewed the world. Perhaps the legends and stories we hear about aren't as far-fetched as they seem. After all, those stories must come from somewhere.
Story 4.
I used to work at a nursing home, and during my years there, I experienced a lot of strange and paranormal activity. I had been employed there for quite some time before I got a better job offer with higher pay and benefits in a larger town. It was sad to leave behind my old life, but I packed up, moved an hour away to a bigger city, and started working for a company that builds car parts. I advanced quickly in the company, making new friends along the way. I had been working there for about a year when I started to notice strange things. At first, it was nothing serious, just small things like shadows flitting out of the corner of my eye, hearing odd noises, machines turning on without anyone nearby, and even hearing my name called a few times. At first, I assumed I was just tired since I was on the night shift, working long hours, sometimes even days a week. I figured I needed more rest. Despite the odd happenings, I really loved my job, and things were going great. My boyfriend, who had recently gotten out of the military, even landed a job with me. Life was good. The first year was filled with minor occurrences, but as the second year rolled around, things took a strange turn. The company had expanded, and my area was moved to a new warehouse just down the road. Aside from my section, the massive warehouse had no other lights on, and everything else was pitch black and eerily quiet. My coworker and I would often wear earbuds, listening to podcasts or music to help pass the time. We did chat occasionally, but mostly it was just the two of us working to meet our part quotas. One night we were short-handed, so it was just me, my boyfriend, and the forklift driver. After settling in and going over paperwork, my boyfriend mentioned he was going to the bathroom and the break room, which were across the warehouse. It was completely dark on that side, but I could see his phone flashlight as he headed off. I was left alone with our forklift driver, whom I'll call B. B and I were talking about our weekend plans, a new game release, and how his son was about to turn one. He was showing me pictures of his son when we both heard footsteps behind us. At the same time, we turned to see an older man walking toward us. It wasn't unusual for someone from shipping to come by and ask questions, but this man was unfamiliar. He wore the same company shirt and appeared friendly, though a bit lost. We asked if he needed help finding anything, Assuming he was a day shift worker, he smiled, said no, and turned to walk back toward the bathrooms and break room. We shrugged and got back to work. A few minutes later, my boyfriend came back with candy and drinks from the vending machine. I thanked him, and we continued working for a while. Eventually, it was break time. We walked to the break room, B following us on his forklift. Before sitting down, I decided to quickly use the bathroom. I went to the closest stall, and that's when I heard the talking. It was very soft, like a whisper, but it definitely sounded like a man's voice. There were 4 stalls in the bathroom, and the sound was coming from the farthest one. I didn't even sit down. I bolted out of there and told the guys what had happened. B and my boyfriend immediately went to check the women's bathroom, but they didn't find anyone. I was near tears, insisting I had heard it. We sat down for the rest of the break, but when it was time to return to work, I didn't want to leave the well-lit room to walk back to my station in the dark. My boyfriend encouraged me to walk back with him, so I did. We worked for the next few hours without incident, and then it was lunchtime, around 3 a.m. on the night shift. I had made homemade stir-fry for us, and we were looking forward to the break. As we were walking together to the break room, we heard footsteps behind us. Thinking it was B trying to startle us, we turned quickly, but no one was there. At that moment, my boyfriend's phone buzzed with a text from B, saying he was going to the gas station and asking if we wanted anything. My heart stopped, and my boyfriend grabbed my arm. Together, we ran to the break room, slammed the door shut behind us, and locked it. The building was securely locked, with only 2 doors, both of which required a key card to open. No one could get in without being seen. We called our supervisor to come check things out, and he arrived shortly after. I should mention, this supervisor is a tough guy, so if anyone had been there, they likely would have been scared off or removed. My boyfriend, who's ex-military, joined our supervisor to look around the building. Minutes later, our supervisor, B, and my boyfriend returned to the break room where I was sitting. "Nobody's here, but I'll stay the rest of the night to make sure nothing happens," our supervisor said. As the night wore on, we continued to hear footsteps outside our area. Even our supervisor, who normally wasn't easily spooked, was getting uneasy. As dawn broke and the sun began to light up the warehouse, we all began to settle down and prepare to go home. I felt safe enough to finally use the bathroom. I rushed in, trying to hurry so I wouldn't be alone in the dark for too long. When I returned to my area, my boyfriend and the supervisor both looked pale. B pulled up and gave them a concerned look. Our supervisor cleared his throat and explained, "Last night, John, one of our good friends and co-workers, was killed in a car accident. He and his wife were driving home when a drunk driver hit them. John was killed instantly and his wife was seriously injured. The accident happened less than a mile from here, on a back road where John and his wife lived." My jaw dropped. "What about their kids?" I asked. Thankfully, their children weren't with them, but John's wife was in critical condition. She eventually made a full recovery, though it was touch and go for a while. The worst part came when we found out that the drunk driver was a man who worked the second shift in shipping. When the news article came out, we saw the man's picture. To my horror, it was the same man we had seen that night, the man who had talked to us. The strange thing was, this man had died on impact, and somehow he had been with us that night. We couldn't explain it. Maybe he hadn't realized he had died, or maybe he was trying to find help. It remains a mystery to this day. I still work in that warehouse, though we now keep more lights on. And for those wondering, John's wife recovered, and their kids are doing well. At the end of the day, I hope all the spirits have found peace.
Story 5.
I had just finished high school when this story took place. It was summer, and I needed to make some money before heading off to university, so I took a part-time job as a sales associate at a popular fashion store in the city center. It was a fun job, and I loved my co-workers. It was low stress and paid well, which was rare for someone my age. I usually arrived around 8 a.m. to work, and on that day, we had a delivery. I spent the morning unpacking stock and distributing it to the necessary departments. Normally, I worked on the women's floor, but in the summer, I would help out wherever they needed me. As I wheeled deliveries to the stockroom, I joked with my co-workers about their sunny attitudes this early in the morning. Not everyone agreed that early morning shifts were great. They thought they were the worst. However, I actually loved them, especially in the summer, because it meant I'd be done by midday and could enjoy the amazing weather. In the middle of a joke, I accidentally bumped into someone. When I looked up to apologize, my heart sank. My manager came racing over and introduced me to the new hire I'd be training that day. Though the introduction wasn't necessary, as I already knew who he was, Aaron. Aaron was a friend of a friend from high school. He joined our school a few years back and made an immediate impression. He was confident, bubbly, and self-assured. Everyone loved him, but something about him unsettled me. Despite what my friends thought, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. It was hard to put my finger on it, but I could see cracks in his shiny veneer. The way he looked at people when they weren't watching, the way his temper flared at the smallest inconvenience, it all made me uncomfortable. Still, I was polite and kept my distance, never wanting to be alone with him. Fortunately, we didn't cross paths much beyond the first few months at school. Now, standing face to face with him, he smiled brightly. "Hey, it's so nice to see a familiar face," he exclaimed, and before I could react, he reached for a hug. My grip tightened on the delivery cart, and I smiled awkwardly. "Oh my gosh, hi. It's so crazy to see you here," I said, trying to keep the distance I'd maintained throughout high school. I quickly told him to grab a box lying beside the corridor and follow me into the stockroom. The stockroom was cluttered with boxes stacked on almost every available surface. My co-workers were busy unpacking and tagging clothes, only looking up when I introduced Aaron. They greeted him warmly and returned to their work. It was now my job to train him, something that should have been the manager's responsibility, but she was quick to hand it off to her subordinates, namely me. I began Aaron on the easiest task, unpacking stock to ease him into things. Though I still felt uneasy around him, I knew he was my responsibility. As Aaron unpacked shoes, tagging them and placing them in racks for the men's department, I worked on the women's lingerie. We eventually fell into a steady rhythm, the clicking of the manual tagging device and the rustling of clothes becoming the background noise. Once he seemed comfortable, I asked him to help me with the lingerie. He seemed to relax, happily chatting with me and Maggie, another coworker. Our conversation began casually, talking about the weather and the state of public transport. We shared excitement about university, but then it turned to something else. Pets. "I have this cat," I said. "A short-haired MGI called Georgie. Anyone who knew me knew I couldn't help but rave about my cat." Aaron seemed to stay quiet at first, but eventually he spoke up. "I hate when my boyfriend's parrot acts up," he muttered, his lip curling. "She's so annoying with all the random noises she makes. Sometimes I just want to strangle her, but Brandon would hate me for that." He looked up from the stock on the table, smirking at us as though he could relate to our frustrations. "Sometimes with pets, you just have to remember they're stupid animals, and you need to discipline them," he added, flailing his arms around and laughing, as if what he said made perfect sense. The air in the room shifted. His casual tone about abusing an innocent animal shocked me, and judging by the way Maggie stiffened, I could tell she was equally disturbed. It wasn't just what he said. It was the rage and anger behind it that seemed to radiate from him. It was as if he didn't even notice the mood change, continuing to mutter phrases like "stupid little thing" and "God knows that thing needs a muzzle," all while smiling down at his work. It sounds strange, but I was honestly afraid of Aaron at that moment. The rest of the shift passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the unease I felt. It wasn't until almost the end of the summer season that things took a darker turn. One midday, I walked into the staff room to begin my shift, only to find my co-workers huddled together, talking in hushed tones, their faces filled with shock. I dropped my bag in my locker and walked over to the group, eager to hear the latest gossip. But what they told me wasn't petty drama or a wild customer story. It was about Aaron. Aaron had been arrested and was all over the news. My coworker Teresa, her brows furrowed in terror, told me what had happened. Apparently, Aaron had been living with his boyfriend Brandon in an apartment while Brandon attended university. Everyone at work knew about Brandon because Aaron constantly bragged about him, saying how romantic and caring he was. Teresa went on to explain that a few days ago, Aaron had returned home from his parents' house and, while Brandon was in the shower, checked Brandon's phone. It had a Snapchat notification from another guy. Whatever Aaron saw made him furious. So furious, in fact, that he went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and stabbed Brandon multiple times. But that wasn't even the worst part. Aaron then lived in that apartment for 2 full days, with Brandon's rotting body in the shower cubicle, eating and sleeping there without a care in the world. He didn't even seem to notice that the man he loved lay dead in their bathroom by his hand. What truly chilled me was that Aaron had the presence of mind to call out of work after committing the murder. It wasn't until a downstairs neighbor complained about a bad smell that the police were called. When they entered the apartment, they found Aaron and Brandon's body, but they also found their pet parrot, strangled, just like Aaron had said he wanted to do. I was horrified. Although I'd always sensed something was off about Aaron, this was something I never imagined. Some part of me wonders if I had an instinct, a base-level human ability to sense evil, or if it was just the way Aaron carried himself in that stockroom. A little while later, I left that job and moved to my university town. Aaron was charged with murder and sentenced to life in prison. I hope Brandon's soul rests in peace. As for me, I hope I never encounter anyone as evil as Aaron again.
Story 6.
My God, Lydia. Can your artwork be any more depressing? Sheila asks herself, grimacing at the 4x6 canvas leaning on the table. It can be, a creepy voice responds. The canvas is hiding a petite body as she sits at a table. Sheila nearly jumps out of her shoes, profusely launching a barrage of curse words as she normally did when her older sister creeped her out. You poop shit. Say something if you're going to hide behind your insane artwork. I can't believe we are related, for fuck's sake. Sheila grabs a Pop-Tart packet from the cabinet and slams them in the toaster, getting crumbs everywhere in the process. It's not my fault you're not as perceptive as me, Lydia says, peeking her head around her canvas. Her green eyes stare at her younger sister. I appreciate the proper critique of my artwork. I do believe it's the most depressing thing I've made. Lydia leans back in the chair and tilts her head backwards, balancing on 2 legs and making her sister nervous. Sheila looks away. A pissed expression still hangs between her ears. Her long blonde hair and tall frame is a stark contrast to that of her sister's short black hair and compact size, but their faces could be carbon copies of each other. It's as if their mom had a printer but black and white ink on one print, and full CMYK on the second print. I'm sure your artwork will turn heads like always, Sheila said. The Pop-Tarts emerge from the toaster, Sheila taking a paper towel and snagging the breakfast squares while they are hot. When you get to college next year, you'll change. You'll figure yourself out there, you young sprout, Lydia says in her old prospector voice. Not if I'm going to be a freak and talk in weird voices like you, Sheila replies, giving her sister the stank face as she slinks around the corner. Lydia hears Sheila run into something around the corner, cursing more as she walks out the door to catch the high school bus. It's been 2 years since their mother passed away. Lydia's fight for custody of her little sister is finally behind her, and she is ready for the last college art show. She spent 2 months working on the final piece of her thesis showcase, and felt it was the coup de grace to all the hard work she had put in. It was her final tribute to her mother, the grief stages of losing someone that inspired you and putting that grief on canvas. Mixed medias of clay and wires, paints and pastels, not to mention the secret ingredients, blood, sweat, and tears. Lydia felt she couldn't fail, and that she would sell these grisly creations. There's always someone that has the eye for macabre like she does. Though, she found this angst and confidence in the wake of her mother's passing. That is something she tries to show in her artwork as she went through the 5 stages of grief. Sheila even helped on one of the canvas pieces. It added a brevity of peace in the sea of confusion and pain. Lydia is ready for this year to be over, and this is the final piece of her closure. The one thing Lydia and Sheila don't have to worry about is money. Their mother left them a hefty inheritance on her life insurance. Their father left a long time ago. Lydia barely remembers him, and he's never bothered reaching out, even when their mom died. Lydia puts her empty bowl in the sink,
tilts her canvas over, and carries it out the door. Her 2024 Ford Edge, she got with the inheritance money, has immense space for her large artwork, though she looks almost like a child when she's driving around in it.
She makes her way to campus and pulls into the parking lot near the art building. She puts her hazard lights on and steps out of her car to unload her final piece without having to carry it across campus. "Is that it?" a voice asked while her back was turned. Lydia turns around to see Dylan, her classmate. "Yup. Took forever, but I think I nailed this last piece," Lydia replies, sliding her large canvas out of her trunk and seeing Dylan's eyes widen as he observes the painting up and down. His slack jaw is the reaction Lydia wants from anyone viewing her work. The canvas has a miasma of dark blues, browns, and blacks from the acrylic pores that cover most of the canvas. As she continues to slide the painting out, Dylan's eyes focus on a plaster mold of a face breaking the polluted surface at the top of the canvas. Like Han Solo frozen in carbonite, the figure appears to be pushing its way through the surface with a ripple effect around the extremities that are sticking out. Whoever is breaking through the canvas, they are doing it in a contorted way. Dylan thinks to himself. Dylan could see the expression of pain Lydia put into her work, her feelings breaking through the cesspool of depression. He couldn't imagine losing a person he cherished like his mom. Lydia hopes that the haunted expression she formed through hours of relentless sculpting, shaving, and smoothing of the crafts she added, that people could see the emotional torture throughout the entity emerging through the otherworldly portal between the frames. She wants people to feel like they want to pull this figure out of this puddle and save their soul, but also not want to disturb the beauty of sorrow she was encased in. "I mean, it's something all right," Dylan says coldly. "What do you mean?" Lydia asks. "It's sort of similar to your other two pieces. I mean, I know it's supposed to be a set, but this one, it doesn't change enough?" Dylan asks himself, as if he knew it isn't the right thing to say, but instinctively gives out unsolicited advice to someone that spent the better part of 2 months crying over what he just casually dropped as a repeat of her last piece, which felt like a stab to Lydia's gut. "Okay, well, what do you think I should fix, since you have an opinion?" Lydia asks in a sarcastic tone, not appreciating the advice of another man who gives out shitty criticism without being asked. "I'm sorry, I know this is about your mother, and I didn't mean—" "Go ahead, asshat. What do you think I should do?" Lydia doesn't feel like playing coy anymore. "Well, I love what you did here with the face, but the medium you used isn't lifelike enough. It doesn't have that punch. I would feel possessed to pull this person out of the darkness if the face had something, that missing realism." That comment. Like Dylan just reached into her subconscious and found the one thing she didn't want anyone to feel, the first critic other than her sister, and he's feeling it. "Are you kidding me? Missing the realism?" Lydia feels a burning fury within her soul at his comment, and his askew view of the amalgamation of suffering she created. "But I mean, I have been looking at your work for months. Others are going to love it when they see it for the first time. I'm just another shitty art student in your class with an opinion. Take my word with a grain of salt. You're going to kill it." Lydia looks at him, knowing he probably feels bad about his earlier comments. "Whatever. I guess I can see what you mean. Thanks for the comment." Lydia slides the painting back into her car. "Wait, what are you doing? Aren't you bringing that in?" Dylan asks. "After your comment? No. I got a couple of days left. I can stare at it some more." Lydia hops back into her front seat, turns the hazard lights off, and pulls out of the loop on her way back home. Fucking Dylan. If I can't convince that brain-dead troglodyte my painting feels real, how am I going to convince some art critic or rich snob? Lydia's thesis exhibition is on Friday, and it's currently high noon on Wednesday. That gives her roughly 30 hours to come up with an idea to put this over the edge, fix it on her painting, blend it in, and bring it back to school with enough sleep to not look like an actual ghoul during the show. Around 5 p.m., Shelia comes home. She saunters her way through the house to see the hallway door that leads into the garage, ajar. Lydia converted the garage into her art studio since she is the only one with the car. The last thing Shelia was learning from her mom was how to drive before she passed away, so she's been hesitant to learn again. Shelia peeks into the garage to see the painting leaning on the art table.
"Ew, I thought she turned that in," Shelia says out loud.
"I was going to," Lydia says, too frustrated to make a creepy voice as she sat behind her canvas. Shelia gasps, holding her chest and about to curse, but Lydia sticks her head out. Shelia sees the sad look on her sister's face.
"I got told that it didn't look real enough by some dipshit." "What? That's insane. That painting freaks me out, along with the other ones you did," Shelia says, attempting to make her sister feel better.
"I think I need a hug," Lydia says, looking at her sister.
Shelia doesn't hesitate. Her sister doesn't ask for physical affection often, so she scurries over and embraced her as she slumps. To Lydia, the warm embrace of Sheila's brightly colored self felt like a hug from their mom. Shelia is a warm light Lydia forgets she needs sometimes to pull her from the spiral. "Thanks, sis. I think I got it now. I gotta make this painting feel real," Lydia says. Shelia looks down at her and gave her a smile.
"Well, it looks real to me, but I hope you figure it out." Shelia heads out of the garage. "If you need anything, let me know. Don't stay up too late," Shelia says as she leaves the door ajar. Lydia walks to the other side of the room and opens a toolbox. She looks at the digital clock on the wall. 11:30 p.m. Shelia should be asleep by now. Lydia takes out a couple of plastic baggies from the hidden compartment she made with her crafting skills. "I think 6 should do it." Lydia preheats her oven she uses for baking clay and pulls out a bag of marshmallows from the cabinet, along with some graham crackers. She opens a drawer and pulls out a bar of Tony's chocolate and breaks it up into pieces and puts it to the side of the other sweet treat. She makes her way to the kitchen to grab a glass dish and brings it back, placing the marshmallows in a row, followed by a piece of chocolate on top. She slides the dish into the oven and sits back at her art desk. Opening the bag, she pulls out 6 dried mushroom caps. She eats one, gagging at the taste as she chews it. The rough texture in each bite makes her shiver. She opens her mini fridge next to her desk and pulls out a can of sparkling water, pops it open and chugs a portion of the can. Looking back into the oven, the marshmallows looked baked, and the chocolate melted, so she pulls it out and places it on a heat-resistant mat, her mouth watering as the initial drugs start to kick in. The microdose of shrooms makes her feel happy, a welcome escape from the depression hole she had been in. She scoops up a chunk of the sweet concoction with a graham cracker, places another dried mushroom, and takes a bite. The warmth of the sweet dessert sandwich overpowers the fungi jerky, all of it melting in her mouth as her body acclimates to the sensation of drugs entering her system. The second bag is her art assistant. Her mind begins to wander as she pulls out a pre-rolled joint. "Feeling real," Lydia thought, lighting up the joint. "Feeling real." Lydia takes a hit, breathing out the smoke and watching it twist into itself. The stagnant air of the garage allows the smoke to linger. She takes another hit, tilting her head back and blowing the smoke straight above her. She rubs her arm with her free hand, the joint still burning in her left hand. Her skin has goosebumps from the smoke caressing her body. Her mind becomes lifted as her feet feel grounded to the air that dangles from the stool she is sitting on. Her skin feels. Her skin feels. The night of the exhibition arrives, and people huddle around the triptych of paintings Lydia has presented. Each of the paintings is placed on a large triangular pillar that you have to walk around in order to see each panel of her devastating story. Her first artwork is visible when you walk in. Dylan saw so many people ogling it. He hopes he can get half of the eyes her artwork usually gets. The first panel, titled "The Agony of," shows the beginning of her loss, depicting a person falling into an abyssal ocean full of monsters of unknown shapes and sizes. The surface of her painting has a bumpy texture from the individual stippling dots of paint she meticulously added. The dots get bigger as your eyes move towards the bottom of the painting. The once small bumps morph into the raised mounds of monsters in the darkness that you can only see from the side of the painting. The effect has people staring at it from all angles and gives a strong impression of the next piece. The piece from represents the chaos from loss and the struggle of pulling yourself out of it. At the top of the painting is a light, a hand reaching out of the canvas with fingers stretched out reaching for the figure in the shadow. It's another painting where the lighting and angle gives you different perspectives on both figures. Like the previous painting, the unknown figure that was once a small speck and not the focus is now larger in the frame, whereas the monsters were the main focus on the last one. People did not stick around this one because everyone is gathering at the last creation and causing the most commotion. Dylan sees Lydia hiding behind the crowd, watching, and probably listening, to the flurry of voices surrounding her last panel. "Wow, you really did it," Dylan says, approaching Lydia. "I heard some people want it for their gallery." Dylan notices her outfit is nicer than her normal gothic attire. She still has her sunglasses on, despite it being an indoor event and 7 o'clock p.m. "Well, I guess you helped, so thanks," Lydia replies, giving a side glance and a smile. Sorry for my snarky response. "Hey, don't sweat it." Dylan nudges her arm with a playful hit, causing Lydia to wince in pain. "Whoa, my bad. I barely touched you." Lydia pulls her arm away from Dylan. "No, it's just... I had an injury there from... art," Lydia says. The black sleeve of the coat she wore looked a little wet. Lydia shuffles her way through the crowd and out of sight. Dylan looks back at the painting. The Journey To, the title of the final artwork Dylan remembers seeing the other day, but now it looked completely different. The acrylic poured surface now have these red tendrils veined throughout the crevasses of the acrylics, almost as if she added a mixture of yarn and glue to simulate the veins, sinews, and hair-like textures. Dylan places himself amongst the crowd, listening to everyone speak about the face. "That face I saw the other day. It looked nothing like that plaster mold. The eye had this glazed, dead feeling that the previous glass bead with an eye printed inside of it lacked. The amount of work she had to accomplish, the discolored grays and yellow airbrushing, even adding a layer of UV resin made the eye feel real and lifeless. The cheek that was previously protruding wasn't a scratchy plaster chin anymore, but a swollen jaw that had smooth strips of leather she carefully placed to look like muscles under the skin, with the expression frozen in disdain as the figure contorted its way to the surface. The added glossy layer of resin she poured over it to make it look like it's breaking through the torrid liquid surface made it so hard to spot the places she blended from where the former mold attached. There is even a smell of fresh hairspray and mildew that somehow added to the wretch. My God! Dylan's mind fixates on the hands. Those hands! That extra layer of clay fragments that look like bone chunks sticking out of the hands. How did she sculpt new ones that fast? "My mom helped," Lydia says in a demonic voice. Dylan yelps, causing most of the exhibition to turn around and stare at him. Dylan feels every eye in the room on him. "Sorry, the painting just spooked me." Dylan laughs, and everyone murmurs to themselves and returns to their thoughts and unwelcome opinions. Lydia leans over and pulls Dylan down by the arm to whisper in his ear. "I also put a little of myself in the painting too," she whispers. "It takes a lot of hairspray and resin to get some materials to stick. I feel like it's going to get better with age." Dylan feels Lydia's hand crawl up his back. "Thanks for the help."